This is people trying to get electricity, hook them up to the generators. And I forget what they're called. It's like a 4-letter name. It's one of the newer military vehicles that is designed to be impenetrable to IEDs. And it's like stocky. It's narrow and it's tall.
Rhino?
MRAP. That's it.
MRAP.
Yeah. So probably that too. I just know it as that. So when they come through the neighborhoods, they come through and knock out all these wires. Everything people just started to set up. So this is constantly in Iraq. I just got a text message from my cousin in Basrah. And she said, we don't know what's happening. Basrah is on fire. It is 70 degrees. They work in the metric system. That's 70 degrees centigrade. That's 158 degrees. And they don't have the electricity to run a ceiling fan, let alone an air conditioner. She's like, you don't know, people are dying here. They cannot sleep on the roofs anymore. They just lay on the floor. They take 5 or 6 showers a day just to survive. Backing up, during the 1990s, World Health Organization report that actually came out on the day that shock and awe started, that the 3 major causes of morbidity and mortality for children under 5 were lower respiratory infections, diarrhea, and measles, all easily treatable or preventable diseases. The respiratory infections and diarrhea were accounting for 70% of the deaths of children under 5. This is American policy that's doing that, and we didn't hear anything about it. The increase, again, in respiratory infections in the early 1990s was due to the sanctions, food insecurity, people were starving, inadequate feeding practices, malnutrition, lack of access to quality health services, combined with population displacement and overcrowding, all of which can be tied to the first Gulf War and our policies after. Diarrheal disease, massive outbreaks of communicable diseases, cholera became endemic in Iraq following the first Gulf War. Dysentery became very prevalent. And the thing is, you need, for children who have cholera or dysentery, all they need is the antibiotic to treat it, and they need to get rehydrated. So you need to be able to place an IV. Well, when you're dehydrated, your veins collapse. And for kids, you need a pediatric needle. Pediatric needles were not allowed into Iraq. So doctors would just watch their patients die because every bit of water that went in came right back out. And that's, and again, easily treatable. Was Iraq a threat to us? No, Iraq was not a threat in 2003, and that's because of the years of economic sanctions. They were started on August 6, 4 days after Iraqi troops moved into Kuwait, on the anniversary of another targeting, America's targeting of civilian population, the bombing of Hiroshima. What we did was we blocked Iraq from selling its oil, which was 95% of its economy. And this was punitive to say, Iraq, back out of Kuwait. We blocked the import of goods, and with the infrastructure destroyed following the first Gulf War, this blocked reconstruction and rebuilding, again, hitting electricity power stations, sewage treatment plants, and telecommunication centers. It was over a year between the Gulf War and when my dad got word from his family, a year before he knew that we were lucky enough that everybody survived. By 1995, with economic sanctions, UNICEF was reporting that the sanctions were yielding a minimum of political dividends against a high human price paid primarily by women and children. The food rationing system that was started by the government was only not providing even 60% of the required daily caloric intake. Water and sanitation systems were in a state of collapse, and there were critical shortages of life-saving drugs. This is in 1995. So the response to that was, okay, we'll start the Oil for Food program. It came into place in December of 1996. Even if it had not been rife with corruption, it would have been a drop in the bucket for what the Iraqi people needed. But of course, as I told you, the regime was selling oil on the black market. Saddam Hussein was living large, and the people around him were as well. So this actually strengthened his regime because they became more dependent on serving Saddam Hussein for their own survival. Now, Iraq was selling oil on the black market and buying drilling equipment in violation of the sanctions from Dick Cheney's Halliburton. By 1997, UNICEF studied nearly 1 million children in southern and central Iraq are chronically malnourished. This is an increase of 72% since 1991. So that's not an aberration, that's our policy. The UNICEF rep in Baghdad said, it is clear that children are bearing the brunt of the current economic hardship. And I can show you through the medical system. This little one has scoliosis. This brace does not fit him, but no new braces allowed into the country. This is the best they can do for him. These little ones, malnutrition. You have starving mothers, they deliver starving children. And especially, there were increased number of birth defects for mothers in southern Iraq. Now, why do you see 2 babies in 1 incubator? This is a picture from Dar Jamal, from his work. You could see anywhere and through today between 2 and 5 babies in 1 incubator. Number 1, they fit. Number 2, when an incubator breaks, you can't bring in a new one and you can't repair the old one. Number 3, when the electricity goes out, it requires less fuel to run the generator for 1 incubator. This is the state of Iraq. This is what was happening to Iraq's children. Estimated between 1.2 and 1.8 million Iraqis died from economic sanctions by starvation and blocking medicines. And this is where they ended up. This is a children's cemetery in Baghdad. And if you look at the date from this National Geographic picture, it is February 2003. Now here we come to shock and awe. Why did we go after Iraq? Well, I'm going to tell you why. Operation Iraqi Freedom, which was initially named Operation Iraqi Liberation, but the acronym was bad PR. They had to switch it over real quick. It's true, there's a briefing from the press secretary, Bush's press secretary at the time, was guided by 2 major special interests. I call this a perfect storm of special interests. On the one hand, oil interests who wanted to control the flow of oil from Iraq, the Bush family, Dick Cheney through Halliburton. Condoleezza Rice used to be on the board of Chevron, used to have a tanker named after her. Zalmay Khalilzad was the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, then became the U.S. ambassador to Iraq. And if we don't look stupid enough to the Iraqis, why don't we send an ambassador who can't speak Arabic? And then became U.S. representative to the UN. Zalmay Khalilzad's resume, he was working at Chevron when Condoleezza Rice was there. On the Zionist neoconservative side, people like Richard Pearl, who was chairman of the Defense Policy Board, an advisory group to the Pentagon. 9 out of 30 of its members were tied to companies that got billions of dollars worth of contracts when we invaded Iraq. So the Defense Policy Board supported invading Iraq. Paul Wolfowitz and Douglas Feith, they were undersecretaries of defense at the Pentagon. Feith was the 3rd highest ranking civilian. His Office of Special Plans was where the plans to attack Iraq came out of, also where the plans to attack Iran were cooking. And David Wormser, who was a special assistant at the State Department. Now I've highlighted those names because back in 1996, Pearl, Feith, and Wormser, Feith, put together a position paper for their boss at the time. It was called A Clean Break, a New Strategy for Securing the Realm. And in this paper, policy paper, they called for 3 major things. Number 1, cut off peace talks with Yasser Arafat. Remember, this is 1996. Number 2, launch military assaults on the occupied territories of Palestine. And number 3, get rid of Saddam Hussein. Who are Pearl, Feith, and Wormser working for at this point? They are working for a lobby for then and current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. So we have the right to know, and we should be asking ourselves, where does the loyalty lie? Does it make sense that American soldiers go 8,000 miles to defend our national security? Or is it for somebody a little bit closer in the neighborhood? Where does the policy come from, and who does it serve? Who benefits? American and Israeli teamwork, this comes from, I'll give another talk to argue that the occupation of Iraq is an extension of the occupation of Palestine, to maintain our colonial outpost Israel strong so that we can exert control over the resources of that region. This is an article from Haaretz, one of the main Israeli dailies, from 2005, that the American military went to the IDF and was like, hey, the IEDs are really killing a lot of our soldiers, can you help us out with that? It is quite frequent to this day that American Special Forces go to Israel and Israeli Special Forces come to Fort Bragg in North Carolina to help train U.S. Special Forces. And some of the pictures from Abu Ghraib, there are Israeli dogs in Iraq from the IDF's canine unit. Close collaboration. Another mode of collaboration